we have all these reports of drones, and I guess I would let you know that a client of mine is going to be coming out with some information to contest some things said by Tim Phillips and others with respect to the drones. I do believe that the United States does have a highly advanced drone program. The question is where did that technology come from?
Interesting. Okay, so can we come on to Lue? How did you guys meet, and how did you start sort of representing him? How much information can you be told? Are you able to be on the similar sort of, like, is there client, attorney confidentiality stuff? Does he have to be really careful with what he tells you, that sort of thing? Okay, so let's come on to the Wall Street Journal article. What were your first thoughts when you saw that come out, sort of part one? What was your experience of reading that?
That's a good way to frame it. What was that experience like? If Sean Kirkpatrick is saying, which he is, look, we've done our work, there's no point, in spending more money on this. And then Luna, on the other hand, says, you're right. There is also no point in spending more money on AARO. I think the average person leaves with, there's a lot of money being wasted, maybe, and I don't see a UFO.
The following is a conversation with Ivan Hannel. Ivan joins me today to discuss new information and a witness that could blow open the New Jersey drone mystery and shatter AARO's former Deputy Director Tim Phillips' narrative. Ivan now represents former AATIP Director Lue Elizondo. He discusses his journey into UFO UAPs, the legal complexities of representing one of the most famous figures in disclosure, and why Lue still needs legal protection despite no active lawsuits. We dig into the Wall Street Journal article on UFO misinformation, Ivan's thoughts on mainstream media's role in muddying the waters, and how UFO researchers and interested citizens are eating their time with the infighting within the UFO UAP communities. A really refreshing look at how we can maximize our time focusing on solving the UAP problem rather than wasting time caught up in personalities. So, the following is a conversation with Ivan Hannel. Thank you so much for joining me, Ivan. I really appreciate it. And I've been following you on Twitter or X quite a bit, and I've seen this sort of communication around the UAP UFO subject. And I'm keen to know, first of all, we'll jump into some of your work, if that's okay, in a bit. But where did your interest in UFOs and UAP come from? Did you have any prior to working with Lue, or where's it come from?
Well, I mean, I think it came. It is kind of hard to say because it's strange. I don't really remember, and that's the truth of it. But I think I recall, like many people, or maybe I'm just adducing it to the New York Times article by Leslie Kean, and because prior to that, I think like most Americans, I thought it was possible. I think most people, not just Americans, but most people sort of think that in the grand scheme of time and the universe, certainly there could be other civilizations. The question, or UAP, NHI, but the question was always, how lucky or unlucky is it, likely to be that I would be around during the exact moment when there was sort of an intentional or unintentional contact with humanity. And I get it, the way I analogize it is like, you'd have to be one of the dinosaurs that was there on the day of the comet. It seems a little bit unlucky or lucky. Well, for them, definitely unlucky. So anyway, so I think it was that which sort of initiated things. And I just began, like a lot of people, I was like, wait, there's more than, there's some substance here. This isn't just, because it seemed, I think the main roadblock for me, like many people, was that it seemed almost impossible to imagine that there could be such a long-standing conspiracy about something that, like, why would you hide this? And how could they have done it for so long? And all the attendant questions. So I think it began somewhere around 17 when I began paying more attention to it. I think like everybody else, I began watching more podcasts, YouTube videos, whatever you want to, whatever forum it was. And then I began to reach out to people, strangely enough, probably on LinkedIn. And I said, hey, what's going on here? And many of them were gracious enough to reply. Now, Lou wasn't amongst those people. I didn't, reach him on LinkedIn, but I'm just saying that that was kind of the initial foray of saying, "Hey, I'm an attorney. I'm interested in this. Is there a there there?" And, turned out to be a lot of them felt there was a there there. And these were smart and credible people. It was like Ryan Graves and Tim Gallaudet and others. So that's kind of where I began to get interested, and I began to investigate more. I think what happened was, and sort of to give a more elaborate answer, is the incidents that were in the distant past seemed to me too, not untenable, but just unknowable, right? Like, I mean, what am I going to know happened in 1947? You're relying on eyewitness reports and newspaper articles, and there's a lot of lore. And then obviously there's been a portrayal of ufology as sort of being fringe or bizarre. So I think, like a lot of people, I was open to the possibility. I just thought it was very unlikely, didn't understand how it could be kept a secret, wasn't particularly fascinated by the events of the distant past just because I thought there would be no way to otherwise verify them further. But when things began to happen in more recent space, and frankly, I don't remember if in 2004 I was even aware of the Nimitz incident or other incidents. But eventually, somewhere along the line, I would say in the last, 8 years, I became more personally curious about whether there was a there there, and began to investigate, began to reach out to people in a very organic way, literally doing the homework that you have to do when you're curious about something, finding people, texting them, uh, messaging them on platforms, and trying to become a part of whatever the there was. And so, yeah, so it was a pretty organic process. And I joined a few organizations and tried to contribute. There was a really steep learning curve. I have to admit, I'm not the greatest, I'm not Richard Dolan or, some great historian of ufology. I wish I were. I wish I had the mind and the time to be that, but I'm not. So, long answer, very, I think, probably fairly typical Genesis story. However, I think, typically more persistent. And I think that's one of I wouldn't say it's a great, maybe personal attribute or quality, but if I get stuck on something, I will go, as far as I need to go to come to a conclusion for myself. So that's kind of I
Interesting.
stuck with it where a lot of people kind of give up.
Yeah, yeah. Have you found it? I'm always interested in people's answers to this around your sort of friends and family and perhaps colleagues and stuff. Like over the period of time that you've been interested in the subject and looking into it, have you seen other people's sort of perception of the subject change? Have people been more open to it, or do you still find that there's an awful lot of stigma attached?
I think still a tremendous amount of stigma, although it's not as bad as in the past. I think people are more open generally because of the publicity attendant and it being on the news, so it gradually diminishes, sort of like snake poison or something like that, like your body processes it. But my personal friends, my wife was always a believer. She always made fun of me. She's like, "See, you're late to the party." But my peers and colleagues, my friends, um, are of sort of mixed opinion. I don't think they don't see how this affects them in the day-to-day moment. And to some extent, I understand. I get up my coffee, I still have businesses to run and cases to manage and life to deal with, just like all of us. But they became more, I think, open, let's say. So within my close circle of friends and family, I think there was, openness, but not real deep interest, except for my wife, who's very, although she's not nearly involved as I am, she is also what I would describe as a person who demands truth, and so she encourages that. So, I'm grateful for that. Among my legal colleagues, and people don't may not know this, but I'm the chair of what's called the Litigation Network of the Association of Corporate Counsel. So, in-house counsel, like lawyers who work for companies. Many of them join this large international organization, and um, and I have heard from many people, even people who've had experiences. But even within that organization, there is, people don't want to come out and say that those who've had experiences or consider themselves experiencers or just are really curious about the topic. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want anybody to know. Or, you can't get a webinar going because they don't want to seem too fringe. or frankly, because it's aligned with Republicans, they may not like, people don't like that,
Yeah.
at least in the present moment. It could
Mm.
easily shift to Democrats, and then what? Who knows? And then I'm also used to be a plaintiff's lawyer, which means, well, I still do plaintiff's work. And they, even amongst groups of, let's say, plaintiff's lawyers, which are sort of on the other side usually of the corporate lawyers. So the corporate lawyers tend to be defense oriented, plaintiff's lawyers and tend to be suing those very same people. So it's different sides of the same legal fence. And I've had people reach out to me and say, yeah, I'm super interested. So I guess in a nutshell, personally, I'm surrounded by people who have an open mind. But professionally, although there is a degree of interest there, many people still feel very stigmatized about this subject. I mean, to the point of losing jobs, to the point of uh, people, thinking you're crazy or weird. And I'm very open about what I think. I don't hide that. I'm not going to live a life that suppresses my um, not identity, but my understanding of reality. And so I refuse to do that. But many people are still, especially in the legal field, beholden to needing to pay bills, needing not to seem weird to their colleagues. And I think I can be an excellent trial lawyer and at the same time also entertain the possibility that we're not alone in this universe and this may be a time of contact. It's got to be for someone, so it might be for us. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's really refreshing to hear. That's great. Interesting. Okay, so can we come on to Lou? How did you guys meet, and how did you start sort of representing him? Where's that started, and how did it start?
About a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, I was introduced to Lou rather organically. It was just sort of an accident. Somebody said, "Hey, you want to meet Lue Elizondo?" And I was like, "Sure, why not?" I hadn't, I knew he was a prominent person in the whole panoply of UFO ufology characters and the cast of characters, but I really didn't know a ton about him. And so I was introduced to him, and he knew I was an attorney, and you know. He had some legal questions, and I think he wanted some, and he's a very curious person. So it's not just like one thing; it's like 20 things. So I began to engage them as best I could, and also I have other lawyers who are very helpful and have their own point of view, and so we all sort of met. Those lawyers are mostly now a part of something called the Disclosure Advocacy Group, which is online, and hopefully they'll start to do some good things. But so I met Lou, and he turned out he had a wide variety of like legal questions, and he's a public figure, and there's a lot of things that happen to a public figure, whether in terms of contractual issues, trying negotiating a contract, or checking out an agreement, or a plan, or just running through what the law is in terms of either the law or procedure attendant to Congress or attendant to security issues, or so it was a wide gamut really of questions that he had. And eventually over time we began to know each other, and I liked him as a human being. And I do this pro bono for everybody, not just Lou. I mean, I don't make money out of this. For some reason, people think, oh, if you make money, you're a bad person. It's like, well, then what are you supposed to do? But in this particular case, most of these people being former government employees, or being, people of sort of public service or public service adjacent, don't really have the money to afford high quality legal representation. And I'm a fairly aggressive, I guess, trial attorney or litigator. So I you know I really couldn't charge them and make it and answer all their questions in a way that I'd like to. So with Lou, he became a friend, and great admiration for him. He's a very good human being. People unfortunately give him a tremendous amount of nonsense, and if they knew the true story, which they'll frankly never know, but he has suffered a great deal wrongly. But he's just a very stoic person, a very proud person. He's also not a person who seeks to harm others or injure them, despite frankly, the bullshit on X. And those people don't know anything. And many of the people, frankly, who people consider heroes, if they knew much more about him, they would change their mind and return to Lou and say, "You really are the real guy." So, but those stories will never come out. So that's the reality of it.
Yeah, yeah. It, it's so complicated. I'm when I look at when I look at the role that you guys do for people that are sort of intel related people, or people that have got this sort of classified information, and there's that mixture. Like, how much information? This is just from a layman, really, but looking in, how much information can you be told? Are you able to be on the similar sort of like, is there client, attorney
Yeah.
confidentiality stuff? Does he have to be really careful with what he tells you, that sort of thing?
Yes, I'm not read in. I don't have a clearance, not only a security clearance, but I'm certainly not read into any, special access program. So as a result, he really can't share with me much of the substance of what he does. And as I tried to relate to people in other instances, I would be disappointed in Lou if he did actually share with me anything that he felt himself was classified. First, because it would be, perhaps a legal conundrum for himself and for myself. But he's a person of principle, and his first principles are to do no harm to the United States. And whether he agrees or disagrees with the particular, stance the United States is taking, he respects it and wants to, as I say to others, he doesn't want to break the law in order to change the law. He's just not going to do that. And for that, even though, I wish for an Edward Snowden to come my way who's willing to run to Russia, and to hand me a USB stick with all the data. And then I guess both he and I would have to, or he or she or I would have to flee the country. Um, I think for Lou at least, he's and I'm joking. I also take very seriously the protection of the country as a whole, while at the same time believing that there is a moral and ethical reason to move towards disclosure. So I think you can do these two things at once. You don't have to choose. You can have them both. I think. But so that's Lou. He can't share with me certain things. Won't share with me. I don't ask for those things. And I don't say, well, where are the alien ships? And did you see them personally? And all that other stuff. I leave that alone. And that's even if I had that knowledge, what would I do with it? So for me, my representation is limited in some respects, but it's still it's still very broad. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Understood. Fair enough. Okay, so let's come on to the Wall Street Journal article. What were your first thoughts when you saw that come out, sort of part one? What was your experience of reading that?
That's a good way to frame it. What was that experience like? So, first of all, I don't think it was well written. And I'm sorry, I'm not necessarily saying that the quality of the writing itself is indicative of the substance. People can express themselves poorly and still have a very substantial thing to say. Nevertheless, for sort of a paper of record in the United States, I thought their elocution of the substance of their article was very disjointed. And as a result, I found it very hard to take it seriously. As to the actual, one of the allegations within it that there was uh, a sort of an internal conspiracy to broadly deceive our own people. Eric Weinstein tweeted and he replied to, we kind of had a little Twitter X exchange, whatever it's called. And, we thought it was preposterous. I mean, I don't know whether Eric actually believes that that is the case, that there was some semblance of a disinformation campaign to attribute to UAP or UFOs, otherwise prosaic but very advanced technology being developed or having been developed in the United States. It's possible. But broadly speaking, suggesting that that is the sole answer or explanation to the UAP phenomena is absurd. So I found it very hard to take the article, its principal argument, with any degree of credulity. And as a consequence, I began to ask different questions than I think the average person. And I understand that a lot of people do, and certainly Chris Millen has done a very good job. Lou has done a very good job. I think Bob Solis has done a very good job of presenting the counterpoint to the substantive arguments presented in the article. However, because the article was frankly so insubstantive and silly in many respects, in my opinion, I began to immediately sort of say, okay, why would you write such a frankly crappy article and then have it somehow be coincident to Mick West's interview of Tim Phillips, which we should address later, and the Daily News piece or Daily Mail piece, I apologize, which itself was also strange. It was strange that there was sort of an amalgam or a series of a few dot points all within the same set of time, making an argument that essentially there's no there there, but doing it so poorly. I began to wonder whether this sort of media campaign is presages or um, uh, the forthcoming AARO report, which I don't know, it could be 6 months from now or 2 months from now. I don't know when it's going to come out, but I began to think, well, maybe this is an media attempt to sort of contour the lines of public opinion prior to the issuance of the upcoming AARO report. That is one possibility, but I also think it's just equally possible that there is some motivation to issue all of this now that may not have something directly to do with AARO. Although many of these pieces obviously have been in the works by the admission of some of the interviewees for a period of time, I believe 4 to 6 months at least. So it's a strange thing to imagine that you have a series of articles all culminating within a 2 week essentially period of time that have been in the work for 4 to 6 months that are so poorly done. I just don't understand the logic of it. If you have that much time and if you have that much runway, you would produce articles that were far better because they don't really rise to the level of even a good Wall Street Journal article or a good, good journalism. So what was compelling or impelling them to now release such a broadly mediocre series of articles? It's a very strange curiosity. So my questions were and have been, and I don't have any answers. Why now? And who is the intended audience? And those are broad questions. I don't know. I don't know the answer to those, but those are my
Yeah.
sources of curiosity. And one last thing I would just say is this, is that I think that in some, and I try to use a legal metaphor just because it helps people to see it from maybe, a legal way. Um, when you are dealing with legal arguments, whether at trial or in the writing process, sort of the litigation process where you're sending documents back and forth and asking the court to make judgments, you don't necessarily have to address every argument that the opposing side says because sometimes it will reify, it will support by contesting the arguments, it will sort of reinforce the arguments themselves as being valid because you address them. And I personally believe that, frankly, a lot of mockery seems to work in sort of disarming, the public from taking it too seriously. But, in ufology, there's so many, frankly, sensitive souls that they take one, slight assertion or argument, and then they decide to, contest it, and then it ends up being sort of a, he said, she said sort of thing, and inadvertently we may magnify the arguments being made by, whether it's the Mick West or the Tim Phillips or whoever it is. Um, we may end up, Sean Kirkpatrick, we may end up magnifying the strength of their arguments simply by actually addressing them. So I wish we'd get past sometimes some of this, but it's in the nature of people to want to contest every allegation, thinking that they need to do so. I don't know that that's correct, but that's just a sort of a tactical opinion from my point of view.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. So, I mean, probably fairly similar to yourself in that you, as a litigator, I'm obviously not a litigator, but you try and find what the message is within that. Like, there's a big piece here, and as you say, all of what you said makes total sense. Trying to put this point across, trying to put that across, and trying to put a message out there. But I'm just like, for me, the only thing I got from that. And from the follow-ups from Kirkpatrick and from Tim Phillips, where they've both kind of come out, as you say, very, very close to the same sort of time, was certainly from Kirkpatrick was, look, this is wasteful, and that was like the main core of the message was all of this is just a waste of everybody's time. It's very wasteful. That's the message I got from Kirkpatrick, and it felt as if the whole article was, look, there's so much that's happened. It's all, mostly nonsense. There's all this stuff that's happened. Let's not waste any more time on it, and to try and close things down because it seems like things are getting much and much bigger. And that's the feeling that I got from it, if that makes sense. It was just this is wasteful, especially around the time of the Doge thing with fraud and waste and this all of these words being out in the media. And to try and sort of put this into this is all wasteful. It's crazy stuff that's been going on for so many years. Let's just close this down, set it to one side, resolved, and
May,
move
may
on.
I may I interject that unfortunately what you've just said is paralleled by this argument that is being presented by Kirkpatrick and others, that we've gone at this a long time, that we no need to waste more money and efforts on this, that there's a reasonable conclusion to be had and we should stop doing that. Well, unfortunately, and this again, this is why I'm not very optimistic about Congress, isn't this the same argument made by Representative Luna with respect to AARO?
Mm.
It's just on the other side of things. So when you sort of use the same argument that this is a waste of money, AARO is a waste of money, ufology is a waste of money. It's all, we're all sort of saying you've inadvertently supported the same kind of thinking that you want to stop. This is why I have very little respect, frankly, for the mindset of, unfortunately, of some of the members of Congress, because they're not thinking through it. If Sean Kirkpatrick is saying, which he is, look, we've done our work, there's no point, in spending more money on this. And then Luna, on the other hand, says, you're right, there is also no point in spending more money on AARO. It's I think the average person leaves with, there's a lot of money being wasted,
Yeah.
maybe, and I don't see a UFO.
Yeah.
So by countenancing or using the terms of the argument of those people, you have inadvertently walked into the trap. And I don't think it's a purposeful trap. I think it's just coincidental, but still, it just strikes me as not well thought out. And obviously, I'm not a fan of AARO. I don't think it's done a good job, but I don't know that the argument should be that the reason to, first of all, I mean, there's a lot of problems. You don't just defund AARO and the money magically goes into the proper UFO bucket that you'd like it to. They're not even run by the same departments of government. AARO is, DOD. The FBI, for example, is Department of Justice. I mean, the money doesn't magically transfer. So even the thinking there is weird. But again, this shows you kind of the people we're working with and against, sometimes by accident of sort of a confluence of thinking, fall into the same traps. This is
Yeah.
not a matter, I mean, look, let's just be clear. Even if you had to spend $1 billion or $10 billion or $100 billion to get to resolve this issue of UAP to the satisfaction of everyone, it would be worth it, because it is, well, maybe $100 billion sounds like a lot, but I would say $10 billion for sure, because it's an issue that's attendant to so many other theories about what has happened in our past. It has implications for whether our government as a whole has been lying to us for one reason or another for 80 years. You've certainly involved the mental energy and belief of many people over, I mean, thousands and tens of thousands of people. I mean, even within government, or at least I'm sure several thousand, if not tens of thousands, over almost a century. I mean, we need to resolve this for ourselves, for a sense of what government is. Obviously, because I believe as well that there's probably a there, and there's some sort of contact and some sort of program to reverse engineer some of this unknown technology or known technology. We can talk more about that in a minute. But I guess my point is that I think this is a misstep by just saying, by arguing about the pennies, oh, AARO's too expensive. Oh, you're right, AARO is too expensive. It just shows some really mediocre thinking.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. That's a really, really good point. Really good point. And perhaps it's sort of by intention. Get two parties arguing with each other and the whole message gets out there. And this is a
Signal,
model
the
thing.
signal has gotten
Yeah. Signal's
lost
gone
in the
out.
noise.
Yeah.
And that's not a way to get things done. This is why, like I said, I'm not, not very optimistic about our chances in the House at least, and apparently the Senate is also pretty weak. So we're gonna have to figure some new things out.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on, well, let's dissect that a little bit more then. What are your thoughts on the chances that we have of getting some kind of formal, I don't want to use the term disclosure because it's quite cliche now. Is it a broader understanding of what this is, what this represents from the officials versus us doing it on our own? And I say us, I mean people like Soul Foundation, Galileo Project, these sort of non-government organizations working on the broader problem to try and resolve it. Or, are we going to cause some problems by putting all of our eggs into the government basket, hoping that, president comes out and says, this is what I'm going to tell you guys?
Well, I think that there are organizations which are trying and apparently making some progress. I don't know, like, hear about Skywatcher, and it's like, okay, well, you show things in the sky, why can't you bring them within 5 feet? Why aren't they just, if you have the power to bring these things down, well, bring them down right here. I don't need videos, just, show me now. I'm not saying that that may not be a future possibility. I'm just saying, there are people out there making efforts. Uh, I don't think, I'm not saying to discredit those efforts. The Tedesco brothers, others who are, doing interesting things, and people, there's tremendously good work out there. So I wouldn't discredit the 50, the sort of organizations out there from the work that they're trying to do, because whether they resolve the issue and, actually bring down a craft or resolve the historical, record, um, I think they're trying to do their best, and they're also an outlet or a forum for community and for people to exchange ideas. And so there's wonderful things about these organizations, and that is good. That said, I don't think disclosure will be real until a government, most likely the American government or another government, actually broadly agrees that there is a phenomena, there are UAP, and so on. So I think we can't abstain from efforts to motivate our government. Rather, I think that we must change our focus, because we can get our government to move forward. But we broadly distracted them from their own task. And these are very distractible people. They'll fly down to Mexico and, and deal with mummies and orbs. And again, if that's the avenue to disclosure, and, provably these mummies, for example, are another species or series of species, or they get one of these orbs to fly around and attack some crowd. No, I'm not saying that these theories are wrong, but I'm saying that within the government itself, to broadly achieve a meaningful disclosure, not only of the phenomena itself, but of divorce that from the historical efforts to explain the phenomena, right? So however you want to think of it, um, until the government, particularly of the United States, comes forward and speaks its truth, I think we're going to have a large degree of doubt about what's real. And unless one of these organizations can literally bring a UFO down to Earth and show, everybody what's going on, then we're always going to be in this sort of middle state of confusion. So I do think government is the principal place we should put our efforts, but I don't think we have a particularly good coalition within the Congress, at least at this moment in time. I think we need to expand that greatly. I think we need to coordinate together in order to do so. This is essentially groundwork, lobbying, information, and trying to find, the smart people to take a look at this and consider it. So I do think, there's different approaches, but I think that we shouldn't, just because government isn't working out now, in the sense of the executive isn't, in the United States, President Trump hasn't said, yes, they're real. And Congress seems to be all over the place with either, seeming like Gillibrand said she didn't even remember somebody. I mean, Tim Phillips or whoever it was. I mean, it's very strange. So I think we need to get back to the basics and actually create a strategy that we approach Congress with as a collective organization. And I've always thought that if we could unify on the ufology side of things and grab all of these organizations and essentially lobby as one unit, sort of a chamber of commerce for all the different businesses or whatever, one uniform, place to go, then we would have greater strength of resources and so on. But But so far, due to personalities and provincialism, that has never happened. And it may not ever happen. So in the meantime, we'll let government sort of proceed one step at a time. I do think we will reach disclosure predominantly because I believe that something to do with the drones that have been present either allow us the strong inference that some great leaps in technology have been made. And the question is, well, where did those come from?
Yeah.
Or the phenomena itself is presenting itself more coherently to us, although, again, it's quite incoherent. I really don't understand it, the motivation, but something is going on with all these drones in the sky. And I don't think they're just advanced US technology. However, I do have some things to say about that at a later moment.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, what do you find most interesting? What do you enjoy digging into? What areas of the UAP subject most kind of grip you?
There's a couple of areas that do grip me, and but one of them is the allegation surrounding the childhood program.
Mm.
That there was a sort of a childhood training program to sort of create through stress, sort of the conditions in the human mind to allow people to, tap into some sort of, I don't know if you'd call it clairvoyance or, the ability to see the future. Who knows? Telekinesis, whatever it is. I do believe I've run into a couple of people who I think are relatively credible, who have given me stories that they were participants in a essentially what appears to them to have been a training program related to UAP and NHI that may have come out of, again, the Gifted and Talented Education Program, the GATE program. I've only met a couple of those people who I have felt have been fairly, you know, compelling stories, let's say, but I think there are others out there. I've also heard from people who would have reason to know that there was, in fact, such a program. Whether that will ever come on record, I can't say. So, knowing that, I think it would be a travesty to ignore the possibility that some lunatics decided to injure and, harm children for the sole purpose of achieving some sort of domain over objects of unknown origin or whatever it is. I think that's insanity. However, I would remind people who doubt this as being a possibility that the Native American children were, in the United States, were taken from their homes and put into boarding homes and subject to tremendous sexual abuse. And if you had asked people, would that seem possible today? People, I think, would broadly say, no, that seems impossible. But indeed, it is possible. In America, we have for-profit prisons, which have done some real harm. And those are a relatively recent development. And there have been horror stories, but if you said, would it be likely that a judge, for example, would keep children in juvenile detention where they were subjected to sexual abuse and eventually suicide due to the possibility of making profit for themselves, you'd say that's not impossible. But there is such a story, and that judge was actually, I believe, convicted, but also somebody, I think, suspended his sentence, as I recall. But I mean, there's crazy stories. Even the Catholic Church childhood abuse program, and I've relayed this story before, so I'm not going to get into the details of it. But suffice it to say, if you were a child in the 70s or 80s and you came out with a story that you believed that, your priest had been transferred to another location and had done harm to other children there and had certainly been transferred again to another location, and somehow this might be part of a broader conspiracy, you would say, no way, that doesn't seem very likely. But in fact, that turned out to be the case. The United States tried to defoliate an entire country. I mean, it's hard to kill your weeds, but we tried to kill all the weeds in another country. Okay. So do I think it's possible? Yes. And the problem is that everything is impossible until the day after, and then it's not impossible. And so, and I could go on, right? Do I think a country like Israel, quite armed, quite aware of its surroundings and danger, would allow people on motorbikes and paragliders to somehow penetrate the country, and kill 1,000 people and kidnap them in, at a music festival? It seems preposterous, but it's exactly what happened, to the discredit of both the defense system there as well as obviously the horror of those lunatics who did that. So I guess what I'm saying is we have to accept the possibility that there are possibly outlandish and insane things happening. And so I think the childhood program is one source of my concern because to do that to children would be an insult to every moral and ethical principle one could imagine, and it's unacceptable. That is one obviously thing that compels me. Another thing is that I think we are ignoring the drones. And we can get into that when you wish, but I will tell you, I think that that issue is one of the paths to UAP, but somehow we have totally managed to set it aside. I don't know how that is. Instead, we're focusing on what was in a safe at one point in time, or just whether an EMP device could have been placed outside of a working, minimum missile site. I don't think they were Minutemen. There were other ICBMs. But in any event, the point is that we're not. Those two topics are the ones that are very important to me personally. And so childhood program, drones, we focus on those. And if you think about it, both of them have a tremendous political potential that is not present, when you're just debating whether there could have been an EMP device outside of a series of, ICBM silos in the Midwest. If there were a childhood program, and provably so, I believe all the dams would come down. Likewise, if you can actually get them to investigate and focus on the drones, quote unquote, then I think that that may be another way of elucidating what is really there. But instead, ufology is quite distractible because, frankly, the people are distractible and do not focus. So we'll see where we get there. But those are two of the key issues in my mind about that might be a very clear path towards disclosure.
Yeah, yeah. I feel the same way about the drones. I was fascinated by the drones, and not just in the States. We've got them in the UK. We had the incursions over at RAF Lakenheath. We've had them in other countries, Germany. I think I've interviewed a few people, two from RAF Lakenheath in the UK. There were plane spotters who know what's above, Lakenheath, because that's what they do all day is they take videos and stuff of the aircraft, and they're seeing these crazy objects, never seen them before, orb-like objects, a few weird-looking drones, how they describe them as drones. And I just thought, but in the UK, just silent. A couple of news pieces, and then that's
Yeah.
it. A couple of days, and then they just moved on. We've got weird orb slash drone slash we don't know what over some of our most sensitive military sites. And we're just talking about this latest music release from this artist, or, the roads have got potholes in them, and it's
It's
preposterous.
unfathomable. Yeah, it is unfathomable in a world where we've seen how destructive drones could be, both in Russia and in Iran, that whatever the drones that people are seeing, sometimes, a circle inside a cube, or I don't know, whatever it is. And, like even the other day, I was watching a YouTube video by a guy named, I believe his name is Max Afterburner. I don't know. That's his YouTube handle, I think. But he gave his own account for some crazy stuff that he saw as a conventional pilot. And so we have all these reports of drones. And I guess I would let you know that a client of mine is going to be coming out with some information to contest some things said by Tim Phillips and um, and others in with respect to the drones. I do believe that the United States does have a highly advanced drone program. The question is where did that technology come from? That is the real question. And when I say a client of mine, I don't mean Lou. Let me just be clear. So there is forthcoming in early July, in about 10 days or so, we'll start putting some things out that would essentially impeach some of the things said. This same contractor is the person Representative Burleson spoke to and alluded to a contractor. That's the same person. So I do think the United States does have very advanced drones. Some of the things we're seeing are American technology, but not all of them are American technology. And so the question is, so many of those questions, why would you place advanced drones in American airspace and have them, do sort of, as if they were surveilling things? These are questions that people just somehow, it's so absurd. It reminds me of, before 9/11 happened, we had many indicia that there were terrorist acts possible using airplanes. And we certainly knew the target set since in the early 90s, the World Trade Center was also the target of a car bomb. And it's fairly simple to imagine, that that the target set would remain the same, but a new mechanism, a new vehicle literally would be used. They went from trucks to planes. Nobody reinforced the cabin door. So it is possible to imagine, despite as utterly absurd as it appearing to be, that the American public could safely ignore the drones over their heads, despite having plain evidence of how important even conventional drones are to, defeating, fighter jets on the ground or whatever it happens to be in air and radar systems. But thinking beyond that, there's also advanced drone technology and UAP, and these things are all in the sky, and elsewhere probably as well in the seas. So I think we need to look at the ufology community. If it would demand answers to the drones, I think it would find a lot of, the ball of yarn would start to unravel, and it would be something that we all accept. We've heard statements, President Trump said that they were FAA research approved drones. The military leaders on 60 Minutes were saying that they were above key Air Force bases and don't know what's going on. There's been discussion in other, not only in the task force, but in the, I believe in the Armed Services Committee about the drone. Like, there is a lot of energy there, and we're letting it, we're not tapping the energy that the American people should have really good reason to pay attention to. So we'll get into it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope so. I hope so. I mean, that sounds fascinating. I look forward to that. Can I ask you, because obviously you're a deep thinker on this, and I'm keen to know your opinion on it. The debunkers out there that sort of seem to just plant seeds everywhere they go and try and interject themselves into different conversations, especially on places like X and social media. I had a conversation with Mick West, I think in season one of the podcast. I thought every year I'm gonna speak to one sort of debunker or like a serious
Yeah.
skeptic and have that two-way conversation and see if we can find common ground. We didn't really. I'll be honest, we didn't really. But I see that a lot of my time is really eaten up by just trying to have a conversation with somebody who is so far on the other side of me. Like I'm there saying, look, there is something there, and let's talk about it because this is not all balloons and this is not all, X, Y, and Z. But then you find that an hour or two later, you're still so deep in these conversations. You've wasted so much time. And I wonder what you think. Is it worth trying to have those conversations with people? Is it worth,
It is
directing your
not.
energy elsewhere?
No, it is not. It is not. And that's the problem because, again, we reify that. I'm not discrediting or saying that the media doesn't have a reason to engage and hear the other side of the story. And that's true. That's fine. So I would not say to deplatform or otherwise prevent a fair debate from happening. But at some point, there's little to be said. And what we don't realize, and I can tell you this both as a litigator, sort of as just a human being, as well as by historical reference, there are some people who are unpersuadable because they can literally say, it's night when it's day. And I think rational people imagine that other people can be persuaded by reason. And I found that that is not true. Particularly in times, in these days when sort of magical thinking, and I'm not talking about UFOs, I'm just talking about broadly magical thinking, is very prominent, but people don't want to resolve things. They don't, they want the government to be smaller, but they want the programs to stay as large. They want the defense to be, the United States to be well protected, but they don't want to intervene in foreign lands like Ukraine. I mean, or have the possibility of that. They want to believe that despite people going and kidnapping and killing 1,000 people at a music festival, that there's some goodwill to be had on the other side. It's just not. And so what I think it is ultimately is, so I guess there are people who are like the debunkers who are impossible to reasonably debate or to elucidate information, because whether they're being, some people say it's because they're being paid off, maybe. It certainly is possible, and it's some sort of organized campaign, but it's also possible that they simply are not persuadable. And I think that's a very hard thing for people to understand. But if I were to say to somebody, look, do you think if you had a good conversation with Adolf Hitler, you would have, you would have said, you know what, I changed my mind, I'll go back to being a painter? Do you think that, jihadist kind of thinking will ever change? I mean, it's possible over long periods of time and tremendous persuasion and effort, people do change. I'm not saying it's totally impossible, but there are sociopathic elements who, for one reason or another, demand, usually it's a fear, it's driven by fear and a desire for control, who just are are not capable of being persuaded. And so if you invest more time in trying to persuade them, to your utter frustration usually, then you end up sort of losing the theme. And so you need to move on to broader pastures. And so I'm willing to let go of some people. And I'm not saying Mick West, he seems like an intelligent person. I don't know that he's a person of goodwill, but he is intelligent. Um, but we must understand that there are very intelligent people who are, for one reason or another, motivated and will not change their thinking. I am quite sure that Vladimir Putin is a fairly intelligent person. I am also quite sure that if I had the chance to persuade him not to continue his invasion of Ukraine, he would not do so. He is a lunatic. And so sometimes we have to, unfortunately, there is not a resolution through additional dialogue. Sometimes you have to take a stand. And the reason why I think we endeavor, sometimes I wonder whether the psychology is that if we fail to persuade the debunkers, our own sense of purpose is diminished. Whereas for me, there's nothing like that. I don't need Mick West to agree with me. I'm fine with him disagreeing with me. I am also fine with Sean Kirkpatrick disagreeing with me. I am also fine if Representative Luna doesn't agree with my thoughts about the politics. I, I, I'm okay with that. But I think because many people in ufology are not okay with other people simply having a different opinion and not being persuadable, I think it actually affects them in terms of what they think. They don't want to admit it, but they are somewhat persuaded by the nonsense being presented, or they just feel this urgent need to counter it. Whereas I'm more than happy to say, look, whether you are a goodwill or not, you are incorrect. And I know you are incorrect, and I'm going to proceed on the basis that I believe you are incorrect, because nothing you have said to me is persuasive so far. So thank you, and step out of my way. That's how I would do it. Again, it's good to talk to the people who have different points of view, but on X, to engage with those idiots who are constantly causing drama and controversy and making maybe a little money from doing so, we are debating ourselves at some point. You might as well be talking to a piece of wallboard and having, a good conversation with that. If you want to go persuade somebody who's unpersuadable, go ask ChatGPT to take a contrary position to you and have that debate if you really need to feel it. But I just think it's pointless to engage further with these people on X because they have made their principal arguments. We know what they are. They are not going to change, and they are not of good faith. Let them die. If you stop responding to them, their air will diminish. They only thrive and exist because we continue to engage them. And this is a detriment to our principal task, which is to stay on the path to disclosure, which in my opinion is on the path of the drones.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. I've articulated that very well. I think that's how I felt watching it, and it's just the algorithm just keeps pumping it out, and you keep seeing it. You go, I don't want to respond to that. I don't want to respond to this. I want to find something useful, and you
Mute
find
them.
yourself falling
Mute.
into it. Yeah.
Mute. Just mute them. I mute them. I don't even listen to them. I get tagged by them occasionally. I've I'm just waiting and watching. But I mute a lot of the bad ones because it's like I'm not going to learn anything from them. They have nothing to say. but it's hard because there's a degree of probably, what is it, dopamine or something, which
Mm,
hits even when there's negative stimuli. There's a bit of dopamine, and it's kind of like a jolt of caffeine. It's like, oh, well, I'm going to go and tell him why he or she is wrong. Do I really want to talk with Sean Kirkpatrick about things? Not anymore. Mick West? Not anymore. I've heard their points of view. Tim Phillips? I heard you. But we're going to continue this targeting until we get to where we need to be to our own satisfaction, not to yours. I don't have the same standards, the same viewpoint, the same understanding of reality. There's nothing further to discuss with them. Why give them air? I have no idea.
yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. I like that. Okay. I'm conscious of the time, Ivan. It's been a real pleasure
Thank
talking
you.
to you. It really has. It's been wonderful, and hopefully we'll have another opportunity to speak again in the not too distant future, if that's okay.
I would love that, and look for something coming out on July 7th. Thank you.
Definitely. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye
Thanks.
now.
Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.